Some events, they just come out of nowhere. They're so sudden, so catastrophic, they just remind you how fragile everything really is. So today, we're going to connect the dots between a forgotten tragedy from over 40 years ago and a crisis that's blowing up right now, all to understand the stunning and frankly terrifying power of the unpredictable.
Okay, so picture this. It's a dark evening in Bihar, June 6th, 1981. A monsoon is just raging. There's this railway bridge, and underneath it, the Bagmati River is completely overflowing. And on that bridge, there's a passenger train, already way over capacity. I mean, this train is so packed, people are literally sitting on the roof. And then, in a split second, it all goes wrong. The driver slams on the emergency brakes, but the tracks are slick with rain, and the overloaded train just derails. 7 of its 9 carriages plunge right into that raging river below. And just like that, more than 800 people who were just on their way somewhere, they were gone. And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? One single moment, one decision can change absolutely everything. I mean, think about it. 1 minute you're just on a routine journey, going about your day, and the next, you're in the middle of an unthinkable disaster. That feeling of sudden, shocking change, it's universal. And that feeling, that whiplash of your world just being turned completely upside down, well, it's happening all over again, right now, more than 40 years later. We're about to jump from that localized tragedy in India to a global crisis erupting in the Middle East, an event that feels just as sudden, but with consequences that are rippling across the entire planet. For some, that whiplash is deeply personal. Can you even imagine? You're in Dubai with your family, you see an explosion at a hotel right across the street. You get on the flight home thinking everything's fine, and then, bam, you find out midair that a war just broke out right where you were standing. That kind of shock, it's the same. It doesn't matter if it's a train in '81 or missiles today.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll get into the war that's setting the Middle East on fire. Then, we'll see why this is creating a nightmare scenario for India. After that, we'll dig into what makes Iran such a tough nut to crack, a real fortress nation. And finally, we'll try to make sense of what this all means for our, well, very unsettled future. Okay, first up, what in the world is going on? Well, what we're seeing is something called Operation Epic Fury. And it's pretty much what it sounds like, a massive, full-scale military attack on Iran, led by the United States and Israel, kicking off with a huge bombing campaign across the country. Now, look at this timeline. This is what's so wild, the speed of it all. In December, Iran's economy is in free fall, leading to these deadly protests. But then, just a month before the bombs drop, you have an Omani minister saying a peace deal is within reach. And then, it's all-out war. The turnaround is just incredible. And that first assault, it was absolutely devastating. And we're not just talking about military targets here. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, was killed in a strike, along with his family. The entire top military leadership was wiped out in a single meeting. But the real tragedy? Civilian sites were hit too. A primary school for girls, resulting in just horrific casualties. So the strategy here was pretty clear, right? It was a decapitation strike. Donald Trump basically said it out loud. The goal was to make sure the people that make all the decisions, most of them are gone. A quick, brutal hit designed to create a total power vacuum. But Iran didn't just sit there. Their response was immediate, and it was massive. Take a look at the attack just on the UAE. They launched over 1,000 missiles. Now, yeah, the air defense was amazing. They intercepted almost all of them. But with that much stuff falling out of the sky, you're still going to get damage and fires on the ground in places like Dubai. And you can see the drone numbers are a bit fuzzy, the source isn't totally clear, but the main takeaway is the sheer scale of this counterattack. And this wasn't just about one country. Iran's counterattack, which they called True Promise 4, went after 27 different U.S. military bases across the entire region. Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, you name it. All while hitting civilian areas too. They basically turned the entire Gulf into a war zone overnight. Okay, so with all that happening, let's bring it back to India, because for India, this whole thing is quickly becoming an absolute nightmare scenario. So why does a war thousands of miles away hit so incredibly close to home? Well, first and foremost, it's about people. You see that number? 10 million. That's over 1 crore Indians who live and work in the Gulf countries. They are now literally caught in the crossfire, and their families back home are just watching in horror. And then there's the economy. India's lifeline, really. Just look at this. Over half of India's crude oil is imported through one single narrow waterway, the Strait of Hormuz. And guess where that is? Right smack in the middle of the conflict zone. So, what does that mean for the average person in India? Well, the fallout is immediate and it's painful. If that oil supply gets choked off, you can bet petrol and diesel prices are going to soar. That means everything gets more expensive, shipping costs go up, inflation rises, the rupee takes a massive hit. And look, the fight is already spilling over. An Iranian warship was just sunk in the Indian Ocean. This isn't some distant war anymore. It's right on India's doorstep. On top of all that, this puts India in a super tough spot diplomatically. So Prime Minister Modi was actually in Israel just a few days before the attack kicked off. And you can imagine the opposition jumped all over that. They're saying the timing sends the wrong message to Iran, who they call India's old friend, undermining India's whole traditional stance of neutrality. It's an impossible tightrope to walk. But hold on. To really get what's happening, you have to look at it from another angle. Bombing from the air is one thing, but actually invading Iran on the ground? Well, that's a whole different ballgame. History and just plain geography tell us it's, well, nearly impossible. Look, Iran is basically a natural fortress. It's not an exaggeration. You've got these huge mountain ranges, the Zagros and the Alborz, that are like giant walls. Where there aren't mountains, you've got these massive, deadly deserts that act like giant moats. Even its super long coastline is fortified by mountains, where they can hide all their missile launchers. It is a nightmare for any invading army. But it's not just about geography. Iran has a massive economic weapon in its back pocket. That number right there, 20%. That's how much of the entire world's oil supply passes through one little choke point that Iran can basically turn off like a tap, the Strait of Hormuz. And believe me, they are not shy about using that as leverage. They've made their threat crystal clear. They've basically said if any ship moves towards Hormuz, it will be set on fire. By doing that, they can hold a huge chunk of the global economy hostage. It's a powerful defensive tool. And finally, there's this military idea called strategic depth. Basically, Iran is a huge country. We're talking twice the size of Pakistan. Its big cities aren't on the coast, they're way deep inland. So for an army to invade, the deeper they go, the longer their supply lines for things like fuel and food get. And those supply lines become super easy to attack. The country itself becomes a weapon against the invader. So think about where we started. A sudden, tragic train crash in India. And now we've ended up in the middle of a global crisis that's all about geography, history, and power. But at their core, both stories are a powerful reminder of just how fast and how completely things can fall apart. You know, whether you were a passenger on that train back in 1981, or you're one of the millions of people caught up in this war today, the fundamental feeling is exactly the same. The ground you're standing on isn't nearly as solid as you thought it was. And that really leaves us with one big question to think about. When the world can shift under our feet in an instant, what does security even mean anymore?